That's the only way to describe what happens the moment you step into a system built on secrecy, fear, and silent control. The Prime Minister, usually calm, calculated, untouchable, suddenly leans forward and demands, "Who is that?" Top diplomats, who normally rewrite the fate of nations, without blinking scrap their entire agenda because of one sentence you drop, sharp, raw, and impossible for them to predict. They're used to citizens folding, breaking, disappearing on command. But you don't flinch, you don't bend, and you sure as hell don't play by the script. You become the variable they can't measure, the threat they can't file away, the reminder that their whole power structure collapses the second someone refuses to fear it. Before we go further, pause this video, hit that like button, subscribe so we can smash 5,000 subscribers, and drop the number 11 in the comments to show you're locked in. If you're still watching, it's because you already know this message is yours. Now, let's tear the facade apart. When the door opened and you stepped inside, the temperature in the room changed, not because of you, but because of what you represented. People who have spent years controlling others recognize a threat before anyone else does. The moment they looked at you, they felt it. The unease, the discomfort, the silent panic crawling under their perfectly rehearsed composure. You didn't have to say anything. Your presence alone disrupted the balance they built on manipulation and fear. They weren't afraid of your words. They were afraid of the fact that you didn't come in already defeated, already apologizing for existing like so many before you. You entered like someone who had nothing left to lose, and that terrifies the powerful more than any weapon or a strategy. They're used to people who shrink, not someone who stands tall with the calmness of a person who's already seen the worst. In that moment, every trained expression on their faces cracked. You walked in, and the entire system felt the tremor of someone who no longer reacts to intimidation. And nothing scares powerful people more than the one person they cannot intimidate. When the Prime Minister leaned forward and whispered, "Who is that?" It wasn't curiosity speaking. It was fear finally slipping through his mask. Leaders who control through secrecy, hate, unpredictability. And you, with a single sentence, proved yourself impossible to categorize. You were not a pawn, not a puppet, not a disposable citizen wandering blindly through their traps. What made him uneasy wasn't your presence, but your posture, your eyes, the way you scanned the room as if you weren't impressed or overwhelmed, just observant. You didn't come seeking permission. You came with your own mind, your own truth, and that truth didn't bow to their hierarchy. The Prime Minister saw that, and for the first time in a long time, he felt powerless. That simple question, "Who is that?" was the moment his throne shook. Not because of you directly, but because you represented the one thing every manipulative leader fears, someone they can't predict and therefore can't control. Diplomats aren't trained to act emotionally. They're trained to adjust, adapt, and manipulate without blinking. Yet the moment your words cut through their scripted meeting, they weren't simply startled. They were exposed. They exchanged glances. They shifted papers. They recalculated strategies in real time because suddenly their rehearsed speeches felt useless. They realized you weren't operating on the frequency of fear they were accustomed to. You weren't impressed by their ranks, titles, or carefully fabricated influence. Your sentence was a reminder that they were dealing with someone who saw straight through the performance, someone who had lived outside the walls of privilege and learned to survive without permission. Their panic wasn't loud, it was subtle, professional, hidden behind polite smiles. But you noticed it. You saw how quickly their confidence cracked the moment they realized you weren't another predictable citizen they could mold into a quiet statistic. The entire structure they protect was built on the silence of everyday people, people who work quietly, suffer quietly, and disappear quietly. It's not a government. It's a machine, one that runs only because millions of ordinary individuals have been conditioned to believe they have no choice but to obey. They're not valued. They're used, drained, and replaced. You were never meant to survive inside that machine. You were meant to be another number, another file, another forgettable name on a report. That's how their system thrives, by making people feel too small to fight back. They don't break you instantly. They break you slowly, piece by piece, until you accept your role as a silent victim. But you didn't accept it, and the system hates outliers, because the moment one citizen refuses to be a victim, others start wondering if they can refuse too. That's why your presence threatens them more than any protest or rebellion ever could. People often ask how targets are chosen, but the truth is simpler and darker than they expect. Predators in power choose those who won't fight back, those who have already been taught to bend. They pick the quiet ones, the tired ones, the ones carrying too much on their shoulders to resist. They pick the vulnerable because vulnerability keeps the machine running. You were supposed to be one of those easy targets. They marked you before they even knew your name. That's how their hierarchy operates. By scanning faces, reading behaviors, identifying who is breakable and who is not worth the effort. You fit their criteria until you didn't, until you spoke. When they realized they misjudged you, their frustration turned into fear. They don't fear strength. They fear people who were supposed to be weak but turned out not to be. Manipulation is their first language. They twist words, bend truths, rewrite narratives. They expect people to crumble under pressure, to become desperate enough to accept lies as comfort. But when they attempted it on you, something didn't go as planned. You didn't flinch. You didn't swallow their stories. You didn't fall for their practiced sympathy. They tried pressure. You stayed calm. They tried guilt. You stayed grounded. They tried intimidation. You stayed unshaken. And that is when they realized the problem wasn't what you said, but who you were becoming. You were becoming someone whose mind they could not infiltrate, and nothing enrages manipulators more than losing access to someone they believed they already owned. They had a script prepared for you, every word rehearsed, every reaction anticipated. They knew exactly how they expected the conversation to go. But the moment you opened your mouth and spoke that one sentence, everything collapsed. Scripts only work on people who follow them. You didn't. Your words weren't loud, but they were sharp, clean, and brutally honest. You didn't choose them to impress. You chose them to expose. And exposure is the last thing powerful people want. That one sentence wasn't just truth. It was defiance, delivered so calmly that it sliced through their authority. It wasn't your volume they feared. It was the accuracy, the clarity, the fact that you saw what they were trying so hard to hide. People like you aren't supposed to exist in their world. A self-aware individual inside a corrupt system is like a spark drifting into a room filled with gasoline. You don't have to burn anything down. Your presence alone threatens to ignite everything, and they know it. They label people like you dangerous, not because you aim to attack, but because you think independently. Independent thinkers don't follow agendas. They don't fall into traps. They don't surrender their voice just because they're told to. That makes you impossible to manage. To a system built on psychological obedience, you are not just unpredictable. You are radioactive, and they have no antidote for you. Most people live without ever realizing how deeply they are being controlled. They don't question the stories, the narratives, the rules that were designed to keep them small. But the moment someone becomes self-aware, they stop being a part of the machinery and start becoming a threat to it. Self-awareness breaks chains silently. You recognize manipulation the moment it appears. You recognize fear tactics the second they're used. And worst of all, you recognize your own worth, something they rely on you never discovering. People who know their value become uncontrollable. That's why they fear you. Not because you are violent, not because you are rebellious, but because you are awake in a world engineered to keep people asleep. In systems built on exploitation, disappearance is not dramatic. It's quiet. People are removed from opportunities, conversations, decisions, and then from relevance. One day they're visible, the next day they're erased. That's the cycle, and it's been repeated so many times that no one questions it anymore. They expected you to follow that path, to be overwhelmed, to be exhausted, to give up and fade out like countless others. But you didn't disappear. You stayed. You pushed back. You stood in the middle of a process designed to erase you and refused to become another vanishing statistic. And that refusal didn't just break the cycle, it rewrote the narrative. You showed them exactly what happens when a victim decides not to play their assigned role. The powerful don't destroy people with force. They destroy them with patterns. They apply the same pressure, the same lies, the same traps over and over, until the target eventually collapses. They've perfected this routine. They rely on it. But when they used their usual strategies on you, something unexpected happened. You didn't break. Not the way they calculated, not the way they predicted, not the way they needed you to. Your resistance wasn't loud. It was stubborn, quiet, unshakable. A type of strength they weren't trained to deal with. Nothing confuses a manipulator more than someone who refuses to fall apart on schedule. And your refusal shook them more than any confrontation ever could. Every system relies on predictability, predictable people, predictable reactions, predictable silence. But then you walked in, an anomaly in a system that hates surprises. You didn't act afraid. You didn't act inferior. You didn't act like someone begging for approval. You acted like someone who understood the game and chose not to play it. And that disrupted everything. Their power wasn't built to withstand people like you. It wasn't built to handle confidence without arrogance, awareness without fear, clarity without permission. They didn't predict you. They didn't prepare for you. And because of that, you became the fracture spreading through their carefully crafted hierarchy. Silence is their most powerful tool. It protects them, empowers them, feeds their authority. People who stay quiet make corruption easy. People who stay obedient make tyranny comfortable. That's why they force silence, not through violence, but through fear. But you didn't stay silent. You spoke when you weren't supposed to. You questioned what was meant to be unquestionable. And with that, you did something unforgivable in their eyes. You proved that silence is a choice, not a destiny. Your voice didn't just challenge their power. It threatened the entire foundation it stands on. You weren't there to ask for mercy or to be accepted. You didn't walk in with your head lowered or your hopes crushed. You walked in with awareness, and awareness is a weapon sharper than any blade. You weren't there to join their system. You were there to see it clearly. You came to expose the rules, the tricks, the illusions that keep people enslaved without chains. And you did. You tore through their performance with truths they weren't prepared to address. Manipulators freeze when confronted with someone who's already solved the puzzle they're trying to hide. You didn't bow. You didn't fold. You exposed the game they built to break people like you, and that exposure is something they cannot undo. Most people become targets. Only a few become turning points. And that day, in that room filled with titles and authority, they realized you were the latter. You weren't a victim waiting for rescue. You weren't a pawn waiting for instructions. You were the moment the balance shifted. Your presence forced them to confront something they never wanted to admit, that their system is fragile, and all it takes is one person refusing to be controlled to start a chain reaction of awakening. You didn't just survive their agenda, you disrupted it. You weren't the target they expected. You were the reminder they feared. You were the turning point they never saw coming. Fear isn't always loud. Sometimes it's silent, creeping into the posture of the powerful the instant they see someone who refuses to bow. And in that room, fear suddenly had a face, yours. Every practiced expression faltered, every confident smirk slipped. The people who built careers on control realized that control was meaningless against someone who refused to obey. You didn't shout or threaten. You didn't beg or plead. You simply existed on your own terms, standing where you weren't supposed to stand. And that alone was enough to make the architects of fear uneasy. Your presence exposed the truth they spent a lifetime hiding. Power only works when people are afraid. That moment, the one where they noticed you weren't like the others, was the moment the game shifted. Fear recognized a worthy adversary, and in doing so, it revealed the fragility of every empire built on submission. Silence can terrify the confident because it is unpredictable. In rooms where words are weapons and lies are shields, your refusal to participate in their narrative became deafening. Each pause you held, each unspoken thought, carried more power than any speech. Silence forced them to confront themselves, their strategies, and their own insecurities. People trained to manipulate others have no experience with someone who refuses to fill their gaps. They tried to bait you, to pull you into conversation traps. But you didn't bite. You let the silence stretch, letting them feel every second of their inadequacy, the invisible pressure of their own weakness. What they failed to realize is that silence isn't passive. It's aggressive. You weren't quiet to hide. You were quiet to expose. And that exposure sent ripples through the room, unbalancing the powerful in ways no argument ever could. Power looks unshakable from a distance, but under scrutiny, it is fragile, brittle, waiting for someone to test it. You tested it. Every glance, every unflinching word, every refusal to follow protocol became a hammer, striking the facade. They had built careers on performing authority, but now their confidence was cracking right in front of you. You saw the cracks forming before anyone else did. The twitch in a diplomat's smile, the hesitation in a minister's gesture, the subtle panic behind rehearsed politeness. And with each moment, their projected invincibility eroded. It was terrifying for them and intoxicating for you. That room, once filled with strategic dominance, now felt exposed, open to chaos. And all it took was someone refusing to play their role, someone bold enough to witness their fragility without fear. All empires, all institutions rely on predictability. Every plan assumes people will obey, compromise, or fear. But when you entered, they quickly realized that their strategies had no purchase on you. You didn't respond the way they anticipated. You didn't flinch. You didn't bargain. You didn't perform. You became the anomaly their logic couldn't calculate. They scrambled, adjusting agendas, exchanging subtle signals, attempting last-minute damage control. But every move only highlighted your unpredictability. Strategies are useless against someone who refuses to fit inside the parameters of expectation. That unpredictability is terrifying to the powerful because it strips them of their sense of control. And that's exactly where dark power lies, not in their hands, but in the refusal of someone else to conform. Every attempt to manipulate, intimidate, or contain you became fuel. The more they pressed, the more you learned about their weaknesses, the gaps in their authority, and the illusions of control they relied on. What was meant to break you became the exact tool you used to build strength. You observed their tactics, cataloged their fears, and responded not with anger, but with precision. Every plot, every whisper, every calculated move became predictable because they never anticipated someone who would watch and act with intent rather than fear. What was once their weapon became your advantage. You proved that the only true power is understanding the game better than the players who believe they control it. Society, politics, and authority rely on invisible chains, the rules that keep people small, compliant, and quiet. Most people wear them unknowingly, bowing to expectations that never serve them. But you didn't. You refused, and that refusal was revolutionary. Every unspoken pressure, every subtle attempt at manipulation, every hidden rule became meaningless the moment you chose not to comply. You were untethered. Your freedom was terrifying because it exposed the absurdity of their control structures. When someone refuses to wear chains, they don't just free themselves. They force the powerful to confront the limitations of the very system they depend on. And that confrontation is messy, dangerous, and exhilarating. Sometimes words aren't needed. One unwavering glance, one steady stare can communicate defiance, intelligence, and unshakable awareness all at once. In rooms of political theater, this is lethal. You didn't need to raise your voice or prove yourself. Your gaze alone forced them to question their own dominance. It's in that moment that the illusion of control begins to crumble. They see someone unafraid, someone aware, someone unwilling to perform submission, and the power they thought they had becomes a fragile facade. One glance is simple, but its consequences are profound. It reminds the powerful that their authority is only as strong as the people who accept it. And you refused. Rules are designed to maintain control. They dictate behavior, silence resistance, and create the illusion of inevitability. They expected you to follow them, bend under pressure, or break like countless others before you. But you didn't. You observed, learned, and then stepped outside them entirely. Every expectation they set became irrelevant. Every boundary they drew became a challenge they could no longer enforce. And with each refusal, their confidence weakened. The rules were never meant to be broken by someone like you, but that's exactly what you did. Breaking their rules wasn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was strategy, survival, and the quiet demonstration that true power cannot be legislated. Every carefully constructed plan they had was designed to anticipate human weakness. But your resolve collided with their strategies, like a storm hitting concrete. They were prepared for fear, for hesitation, for compromise, but you offered none of it. Their schedules faltered, their words faltered, their authority faltered, and they couldn't hide it because your presence illuminated the cracks in real time. It wasn't aggression that disarmed them. It was unwavering determination, calm under pressure, and a refusal to play the expected role. When resolve meets calculation, the result is unpredictable. And in that unpredictability lies the most dangerous weapon against power, yourself. Power is trained to fight enemies it can see, analyze, and predict. But you became the shadow they never anticipated. You moved through their system, aware, present, untouchable. They tried to corner you, to label you, to neutralize you. But shadows cannot be caught. Every attempt to confront you failed because you weren't present in the way they expected. You didn't react, you observed, you didn't stumble, you calculated. And their frustration grew into fear. Being a shadow is more than evasion. It's power in itself. You are untouchable because you exist outside their rules, their expectations, and their control. Confidence is the currency of the powerful. They display it, trade it, and depend on it to command obedience. But all of it died the moment you spoke. One sentence, delivered with clarity, awareness, and refusal to bend, was enough to dismantle years of pretense. They scrambled, recalculated, and tried to mask the panic that rose within them. But it was too late. Their authority had been exposed as fragile, and their confidence, which they relied on as armor, shattered like glass under a precise strike. You didn't scream. You didn't insult. You simply spoke the truth they could not contain. And that was enough to erode everything they believed about themselves. The most dangerous people are the ones the powerful refuse to acknowledge. Pretending you're irrelevant is their favorite tactic, because ignoring a threat can keep it manageable. But you refuse to be ignored. You made yourself impossible to dismiss, undeniable and unavoidable. Every attempt to marginalize you failed because your presence demanded recognition. You weren't asking for it. You were claiming it, and that claim forced the powerful to confront a reality they preferred to deny. Not every opponent is predictable, compliant, or afraid. Threats are most powerful when they are real. You became that threat, and they had no countermeasure. Every system has boundaries, the invisible lines that, when crossed, trigger panic, reaction, and fear. You crossed that line without hesitation, without apology, and without flinching. The room shifted instantly, tension filling spaces that were once controlled. They weren't reacting to aggression. They were reacting to audacity. To someone who refused their invisible rules, who ignored the boundaries meant to keep people small, who acted as if their system was optional rather than mandatory. Crossing a line is dangerous. Crossing it strategically is revolutionary. And you did both. Machines, empires, hierarchies, they are built on predictability, obedience, and fear. One person can never change that, they think, but one mind that refuses submission can destabilize everything. That mind sees through the illusion, anticipates the manipulation, and acts in ways the machine never calculated. You became the spark in the engine, the anomaly in the formula, the variable they could not control. And once the first crack appeared, the machine began to wobble. Decisions faltered, confidence faltered, authority faltered, all because one individual refused to obey. This is the power of awareness, courage, and defiance. One mind can rewrite the rules that were meant to govern millions. Fear is currency in the hands of the powerful, but it can become power in the hands of the aware. They feared you, not for your strength, but for your refusal to submit. And that fear, once observed and understood, became your greatest advantage. Every glance, every word, every silence fed into a new dynamic. You weren't running from their power. You were using it as a mirror, reflecting their fragility back at them. And in doing so, you became stronger with every moment. That day, you didn't just survive the system, you turned its own weapon against it. Fear became your ally, your shield, and your signal to anyone watching that resistance is possible. You became the unstoppable,